Okay, perfect. So I'm going to start now. Well, before I just want to say hello, everyone. Thank you. It is our greatest honor to have you all here today, and thanks for joining us to our first webinar from this region of the world called Grad School Roadmap Roundtable. And before we start our webinar, I just want to introduce a little bit who we are and what is the Trainee Initiative. So, second slide. Oops, yeah, we were born in about March this year. I think just exploded from there. We have organized several seminars, webinars, and talks. And basically, as the title says, we are the International Union of Biochemistry and Molecular Biology Trainee Initiative. And we are composed of undergrads, from undergrads to master students to PhD students, as well as postdocs. And we again comprise people from different regions around the world, from the Americas to Europe to Africa and to Asia and Oceania. So again, I think this is a milestone, I guess, because we want to promote and ensure that every trainee has access to different educational, technical, and professional development opportunities and activities, and also a chance to foster their passion in biochemistry and molecular biology by providing first a diverse environment, but also a supportive one. The International Union of Biochemistry and Molecular Biology offers several fellowships, and I just want to highlight a few of them. For example, they offer mid-career research fellowships, as well as the very famous Willen research fellowships, or the Tang Education fellowships, together with this one that, for example, involves the exchange of, if I'm not wrong, of Hispanic and South American scientists to North America, including Canada. They also offer different travel fellowships, so feel free to get in contact and to get into our webpage for more information about all of these different opportunities. And last but not least, the IUBMB is also offering relocation support for displaced trainees because of different reasons. So again, this is one success case from an Ukrainian PhD student, Senia Oksana, who just started working in the lab of Flavia Marinelli at the University of Insubria, Italy. So again, before we start today, just thank you, everyone. I'm going to stop here and I'm going to hand over to you, sign up to introduce our wonderful speakers. And also on behalf of the Trainee Initiative, thank you to all of you for accepting our invitation. And we hope this is going to be a fantastic webinar. I stop sharing.
Hello, everyone. My name is Zainab Rafat, and I am going to be your host for today. I am very pleased to welcome you all to our third event and our first ever roundtable event, the Graduate School Roadmap, a roundtable discussion. Through this event, we'll help you answer some of the most common and mind-boggling questions that we have received from our social media handles and Google Forms regarding graduate school. We hope to support, encourage budding scientists from Asian and Oceanian countries with knowledge and resources for a successful application and journey, eventually leading to a triumphant career in biological research. If you still have any questions in mind, feel free to drop them in the Q&A section at the bottom left, right beside the chat button. I also request our guests to post our their preferred contact address, so that our audience can reach out to you even after this webinar ends. In order to get into graduate school, we're expected to be extraordinary, to stand out from the crowd because of the increasing competition among students to earn more and more educational degrees. But we never know, how do we stand out from this crowd, and what do we have to do, and what does it take to stand out in order to create a spectacular application for our dream university? To discuss this, I'd like to welcome Professor James Murphy, Head of Inflammation Division at Walter and Eliza Institute of Medical Research in Australia. Haris Ehsan Safdari, PhD candidate at the University of Hamburg in Germany, and also a group leader at AMU Scholarships and Opportunities in India. Dr. Yen Tran, postdoctoral fellow at Monash University in Australia. Robert Aguilar, PhD candidate at Columbia University, USA, and the director of events for Grad Map Philippines. And Marta Olauska, PhD candidate at QIMR Berghofer and Queensland University in Australia. Thank you all for joining us today. So I'm going to start with more of an icebreaker type question. I'd like you to complete the sentence. I pursued further education in my field I am in today because. I'll start with James.
Sorry, could you repeat that?
I complete the sentence. I pursued further education in my field I am in today because.
Oh, I always say it's because I like puzzles. So growing up, I like mysteries and I like puzzles. So that's what we do. We figure out what happens inside cells.
Yen.
So I have the same answer. I also like puzzle. So yeah, and also I like doing biology. Yeah.
What about you, Robert?
Well, I guess for me, it's because I was always fascinated by how can an organism, like a multicellular organism, have the same genome across all its different cells, but then we have this diversity of cell types. So I feel like that's like the guiding question that I have in my career. And I wanted to really address that question. That's why I'm doing a PhD in that question.
What about you, Haris?
For me, I think structural biology was one of the most fascinating field, and I like to see the macromolecules in function, especially in cellular states, for which I do some tomography and also electron microscopy to study the macromolecular complexes. And this is one of the reasons that I entered into this field, because I'm amazed by the molecular machineries, how they work in cells, and the different kind of function they perform in a cellular environment. So, yeah.
Last, Martha.
Well, I've always been fascinated by how human body actually works and how incredible regenerative potential it has. Not as good as many other animals, but it's exciting to discover the beauty of life that we are living surrounded by. So that was kind of my motivation behind it.
That's great. A few of you have chosen to obtain a PhD right after your bachelor's. I wanted to ask Martha and Yen, what influenced your decision to do that?
Yeah, so for me, when I was undergrad, I have the opportunity to do exchange scholarship, exchange program in overseas. So I have a chance to do research in the lab, and it fascinated for me. So after I finished my bachelor, I just go ahead with PhD, master and PhD. Yeah.
Martha?
Well, when it comes to academic career, yes, I did do bachelor and then jump to PhD. However, I did have a 2-year gap being a research assistant. I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do and which field exactly to pursue. And that 2-year gap, in a way, helped me to decide what I want to do. I always had in mind a PhD, and I just needed to clear my head to know exactly what I want to continue in.
Okay. While in our undergrad, it happens sometimes that we have an interest in a particular topic at first, let's say microbiology. And then in the coming up semester, we shift our interest to another subject. One common question that we received from our audience is that with those changing interests, how did you know that this university or laboratory is the right match for your master's or PhD? I'd like to go in sequence. I'll start with Harit.
Yeah, if your question is more about selection of laboratory, right, with the respect to your subject interest. So I have to say that, I mean, take your time. Research, I have to always say to people, and I always felt myself, that take your time. Don't be in a rush. And sometimes when you give yourself time, and sometimes gradually your interest also changes. And don't be, I mean, when I was also in my master's, I was also confused actually, because you don't go into, because research is specialized into one of the areas, right? And when you are studying a master's course, for example, it's more generalized, where you study biochemistry, you have a special interest, and then you think, okay, I have a good marks, I have a good grades in that. Then you have a microbiology, then you also think, okay, I can do that also, right? So you're kind of in a conflict that which way to move. But I have to say that it's more about your interest that develops over the time. But then taking a very careful decision, and when especially you are applying to grad school, is important. And for that, I have to say the selection, as you said, how to have a good fit. And for that, I have to say that basically you have to go to the research papers, right? And you read the research papers of the lab, you'd kind of know. Basically, selection of a PI is a different aspect that I'm not going to tell now, because that is a big topic, right? That we can discuss later, hopefully, in this webinar. But generally, if you want to see a good fit, of course, you have to understand the research, the kind of techniques that they want to imply, the kind of work that they are doing, and at all you are fascinated by their research, the most important question, right? Because as a researcher, it's important to be excited by the field, because every day, you have to go in the lab, you'll have some problems in the lab. But if you have, this trust and science, then I think it will work on. So, yeah. So bottom line is that don't be in rush, take your time and read papers, and then decide this decision where to go and what to do in your PhD. Yeah.
Jan, what's your take on this?
Yeah, so for me, I think I was a bit lucky, because when I was undergrad, I know what research topic that I want to do. So I'm always fascinated about cell, and I want to understand how it can how we can make a decision, like either proliferate or die, or like just stay quiescent. So that's why after bachelor, I read the research, and I like to study fundamental research. So I go for cell signaling. I read the paper about cell signaling, and contact with the lab member, like to discuss about the lab environment as well with the PI, about the specific topic that they do in the lab. And then I found that it's the right suit for me, then I apply for that.
What about you, Robert?
So I guess for me, I think it starts with the lectures in class, right? So like you go to a lecture, and then the professor talks about certain topics, and then you kind of latch on to like a certain topic. Hey, I think this is like really interesting. And I think I'd agree with what's been said before. I feel like what's really important is to try different fields and see, what you feel about different fields. So for me, I've tried working with say mammalian cell cultures, and I felt like, these are just cells. It didn't seem like the things that I was doing to them and the results that I was getting from them, I found it hard to be relevant to like the actual organism, right? And so I felt like after that experience, I was like, okay, maybe I want to work on a whole animal, right? Just to see if the findings that I see in the cells actually translate to like the systems level, the entire organism level. And now I'm working with C. elegans, which is, which you can like manipulate using genetics, and then you can see the effect of certain mutations on the entire organism. So I feel like with experiences, with trying different labs, you figure out what you like and what you don't like. And I agree that you should really take your time in picking a topic, because I feel like as you go through your career, you become more restricted to certain fields, and you wouldn't want to be in a field that you're not really into. So yeah, just take your time to try out different things.
How about you, Martha?
Well, science is a beautiful thing, as no matter kind of what topic you choose to begin with, the skills you are developing, they are quite translational across other fields, in other sciences. My career has been quite weird in a way. I don't have a linear pathway when it comes to, let's call it interest. When you look at my CV, I started in microbiology, then I went into analytical chemistry and microfluidics. Now I'm kind of in cardiac bioengineering lab. So it's a little bit different. I do have a bigger picture in mind. It happened during my bachelor year when I came up with a particular idea of what I would like my future lab to be. And when that idea struck me, now I'm trying to get the necessary skills to be able to build that lab on my own. And for the outsider, it might look like I have no idea what I'm doing. I'm just jumping between fields and yeah, that I just don't have a plan. But there is a bigger picture in my head. So I agree with everyone, take your time. It will come to you, the decision. You will read so many papers over your academic time that at some point your light bulb will just lit up and you will be like, well, I really enjoy reading this, or I really enjoy doing this particular technique, and you will just follow that suit.
James, do you have anything to add to what they have said?
I think they're already really good points, and I think it's about getting experience of different things, because when I went in, I was interested in everything, but as I sort of went through undergrad, we got some great lectures, which has been mentioned as well, and that really captured my fascination. So I moved country to join a lab doing the work that I was really interested in, because it wasn't offered in my home country, or at least in my home institution. So I think it's about experiencing.
Okay. Talking about research supervisors, how did you guys contact them and when? Robert.
So when I was applying to grad school, I actually didn't contact, well, in the US, you don't need to contact professors for you to apply to grad school. It's, it's a good thing if you contact them beforehand, but I just didn't have the time to do that before. And, but still that didn't stop me from, getting into a program and a lab. But I will answer your question in the context of me being in the program already and, being in the PhD program and doing my rotations. And what happened was, so the professor that I'm working with now actually interviewed me during my PhD interviews. And that was just how, my interest in his lab started. So I wasn't really interested in C. elegans at all. In neuroscience, I wasn't really thinking of neuroscience, but then during the interview, he, explained his research, and I was like, that could be something that I could be doing. And it just, I feel like it just blossomed into, something bigger as we talk to each other. So this experience this isn't like a typical, approaching the supervisor experience. It's more two-way in my experience. But I feel like in other programs where you have to contact the supervisor beforehand, some people, shoot an email explaining their, interests and how that interest might fit into the research program of the lab. So I feel like other people might speak to that better than me.
Martha.
Well, as I mentioned, I was an RA before I entered my PhD, and that was a good experience in deciding what I wanted to do in the future. But also, my supervisor there asked me if I want to do PhD with him, and that was an easy option. I already knew the field. I already knew what I wanted to do if I stayed with him. However, I did want it to change into something more connected with biology, as that was analytical chemistry sort of lab. So I decided to have a look around, do classic Google search of bioengineering researchers in Australia, as that's where I was at the time. And a couple of researchers really came through for me when it comes to their research. I was really fascinated by what they were doing, by their papers, by the techniques they were using. So I contacted all of them. I wrote an email that soon I would be interested in a PhD project. I sent them my CV, sort of my personal statement, letter, and the next day I had responses from all of them, surprisingly. All of them wanted to have an interview with me in a couple days. And so I went through that. I had a chat about what I'm interested in, what I see myself doing in 10 years' time, more or less, and why I chose particularly them. So it was like an interview. Let's meet. Let's see if I fit into their agenda, if they fit into being my supervisor. And one of them, which is my current supervisor, was awfully nice, and he also offered me to come to Brisbane, where I'm currently, and have a look at the lab, meet him personally, talk about scholarship opportunities. So I did that, and from then on, we were just working together on an application for a scholarship. When did I apply? I would say that it depends with the funding rounds when the scholarship deadlines are due. It takes around 2 months maybe to prepare a good application for a scholarship, depending on obviously requirements. And so depending on where that scholarship round is in your country that you intend to, I would definitely start advertising yourself and reaching out to supervisors a couple months before that.
Thank you, Martha. Haris, do you have anything to add?
No, I think most of it is covered, but I can give you an aspect from different field because I'm from Germany, so European region. So generally in Europe, as compared to US, it's different because mostly people prefer to contact them directly. So for me, it was mostly that I have to contact my professors directly. So I used to write an emails, short, precise emails with a very nice cover letter and an updated CV showing your skill sets and applications, for example, if you have, and especially the research experience. And of course, it has to be second. Of course, the professors don't have time to read your like 3-page emails or describing everything. It has to be short, otherwise it will go to bin, because I mean, we know as a professors, I mean, I am doing PhD and I know my professor is so busy that he will not see an email which is very long, right? So be short, be concise. For me, it was lucky because I had a lot of experience in my field already. So when I contacted my boss, it was more about just interviewing, and he said to me, present your research work that you are doing. So I kind of prepared 5 slides, and they took a Skype interview where they asked me questions about my research, and that's kind of given my boss an idea that I'm a good fit for the lab. And that basically, I mean, 3 hours later, he sent an email. Then I said, okay, I'm coming, visa. So.
How about you, Yen?
Yeah, so when at that time I was applying for the master and PhD combined. So it's like when five years for both master and PhD degree. So it was a big decision. So I do have to read very carefully every research in the university. I apply. I think I start to contact professor about 2 months before the application, and I list on 10 lab that I want to apply, and I rank them in the order, like the one I want most and the one I want least, and I send the email to all of them. And I think I only got 3 replies email from 10, and yeah, and so after have the interviews, I send them my transcript, like the academic transcript, a CV, and also the motivation letter why I want to join their lab. And after the interview, yeah, I pick one lab that I like most.
Okay. James, as a supervisor yourself, what do you look for in prospective graduate students to work in your laboratory?
Yeah, I think a lot of it's already been covered. All of the people talked about how they'd approached someone quite directly. They'd chosen their field of interest. I guess, except it's a bit different in the US with the rotation system. we don't have that in Australia, and it's quite infrequent in Europe as well, I understand. But people get in touch with me and they tell me why they're interested. They might have read one of our papers, they might have seen someone from the lab presenting, or they might know someone from the lab, and they get in touch and they tell me what they're passionate about and what they want to learn and what they can bring to the table. So I don't often, a number of people would write to me, and I'm sure we'll cover this later on, but it's quite ill-directed. Like they talk about their background in a long letter, which obviously isn't ideal, as Harris mentioned, but it's kind of, you could tell that they're writing this to dozens upon dozens of people. They haven't read our work. There's no real passion for what we're doing. They haven't made it clear how they would fit in and what they would bring to the table. So even if it's naive to say, oh, I'd love to work on this, or have you thought about this question? It shows that you're really engaged with what we work on. And that's really what I think we're looking for when we're looking for new students.
So there are times when, due to lots of traffic in the professor's inbox, the email sometimes gets lost and doesn't reach the recipient. In that case, is it better to contact the postdoc students or other graduate students of the lab to help us get in touch with the professor?
I'm not sure. I guess it depends on how passionate you are about the position. I mean, it's hard not to be discouraged if you don't get a reply. I usually reply, and let people know that the lab isn't taking students at the moment or whatever. Or even if I have one of these emails that cold calls, I usually reply to say, look, this isn't probably how you should do it. You're not going to get a lot of replies. This is what I encourage you to do. Tell them why you're passionate about it, what work you've encountered from that lab, what techniques you're interested in, all those sorts of things that show that you're really engaged. And so I try to help people, but often the volume is such that I can't do that all the time. But I'm not sure if it kind of depends. If you know someone in the lab, definitely get in touch with them. You've probably heard good things about the lab if you want to work there as well. So like people in my lab come to me and say, oh, I know someone who's interested in what we work on. And I said, well, send them over. I'd love to discuss with them.
Harris, you studied your master's at the Indian Institute of Science in Bangalore. Can you please tell everyone how you got into this institution?
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about Indian Institute of Science or Germany?
Indian Institute of
Okay.
Science.
Yeah, I mean, it was more about, getting an interview right. So basically, most of the Indian interviews are more about PhD interviews, where they kind of ask you research questions, or basically more like designing research questions. So which is actually good, because ultimately it's more of the research is always about designing an experiment. So the idea there was, whatever experience I had, there was questions and also thrown on my research field. And also some of the questions they would ask, for example, they say, for example, there is a helix of membrane protein and it's this 10 residue, how much length it is. No, of course, it's theoretical, right? You know how much nanometer a single DNA alpha helix is. So you have to these kind of questions they were there. But also at the end of the day, when you talk about the previous work, they kind of ask you the questions basically related to your research. And then what is the flaws in your research? What do you think? And this requires a conceptual thinking. And I think that's helped me in also here when I'm here doing my research, because ultimately critical analysis of your own work is more important, I think, over the time, which this kind of skills develop when you try to comment on the research, what is their flaws and what I can do more. So I think that was the key to getting into Indian Institute of Science, and also here as well, I guess.
What is the general timeline of study for the entrance exam and the interview?
I would say it depends on the person to person, but I would say prepare early. For example, take 3 to 3 months early, at least prepare hard. I mean, the Indian curriculum is designed in such a way that you have to take time for definitive competitive examinations, which are there in India, as you know, right? For example, JRF and GATE exams. GATE is of course, universal, because it is applied to some other countries, for example, Singapore, maybe Australia, I'm not sure. But yeah, I mean, there is these examinations for which you prepare, but at the same time, I have to say that getting a proper research experience is critical. And for that, I think, as I said, it matters. What matters more is take your time. Sometimes you are in a rush and you think that, okay, I'm done with the master's and now I have to go into my PhD, for example. But I think, as a couple of people here, for example, Marta told, right, she took 2 years of gap, and then it's not a gap to me. It's more like a buffer area where you learn and where you give your time. And then when I took my time, I think I now have a field where I think I'm very confident, and I really, really love this field. So to be at the right track, to be at the right field, you need time. That's what I always say to people, that don't be, take your time. I mean, you will not, be left behind by your colleagues 1 or 2 years just because of your research interest. Everybody has their own timeline. New Zealand has a different time now, but they are working, and I am in Germany. So every person has a different timeline. So don't be discouraged by seeing your friends going ahead or back in research, because research is more about your own interest and research. Yeah.
Thank you. What is the importance of having a publication in your name before grad school admission? I'd like to start with Robert.
It helps, but it's not a requirement at all. Like, I had 0 publications going into grad school. But at the same time, I know people who've been part of, big papers going into grad school. So I feel like what's more important than publications is showing that you can work on a research problem. Basically that's what a publication tells the committee, right? They tell the committee that you've worked on a project, and that project, led somewhere. But even without a publication, you can show that in your application, right? So in my application, because I had no publications, I emphasized what my contributions to the project that I worked on, and what the question was and why it was important, and how I tried to answer that question. So I think those are more important than just having your name on a publication. I think that those tell more to the committee, right? Because even if your name is on a publication, the committee doesn't really get a sense of what your contribution was to that paper. It could be that you just cloned something, right? And then that's just so happened that you were lucky that cloning thing, got somewhere. So I feel like it's more important to emphasize what your research questions are, how you answered them. Yeah.
And does it play any part in winning scholarships?
I feel like, it's always good to have papers in your name. Like, it can only be a good thing, right? So if you have papers, then good. But what I'm saying is, if you don't have papers, then that shouldn't stop you from applying to these things. Yeah.
What about you, Haris? What do you have to say about this?
No, I agree with Robert actually most of the time. As he said already, that it's not always about paper publications. Of course, publication strengthens your CV, and it's good to look at, right? When you send up to a professor and contact him, is like amazed that you have publication. But again, what matters more is the contribution, because at this stage, I don't think that, in undergrads, mostly people make such a contribution that you generally get first author papers. So my point is, get research experience more and show them that you are a good fit to lab. Sometimes that matters more. I can give you an example for that. My lab has one of the PhD students who didn't have any paper. He's from Italy, and he joined at the same time as me. But he has a very strong interest in ribosome structural biology, so he's now with me. I had a couple of papers, actually 3 something before PhD. So you see the variation, right? I had papers and I got it. Other guy who has no paper, but definitely a lot of techniques he knows which are used in our lab. So it was a good fit. So my boss chose him without any publication. So as Robert told, right? So it's all, as you can see from this example, that basically it's not always about publication. It's always mostly about the proper fit into the lab that professors look at. If you are very fit into the program, definitely cheers up for the professors, because they like that.
What if you have a low GPA in your undergrad?
Yeah, it's a general conception. Again, I wouldn't say that GPA ultimately matters, because sometimes, in some sense it matters. My boss sometimes says that, okay, some GPA people who have good GPA turns out to be good researcher, but I always don't agree also in that point, because sometimes you see research is a very different field. And sometimes you will see that a bright student in your class who is getting 9.5 CGPA out of 10 may turn out to be not a good researcher, because research is a very different thing. And a person with a 7 CGPA may turn out to be, because it's more about the system in the world has been designed in a very remote way, a rote way, I have to say, because you learn, you textbooks knowledge, and you just try to, more like a memory test. You just say whatever you want in your papers and write and take and stuff like that. But I have to say, the research is more not about those technical skills, right, which you learn, and the analytical thinking ability that you develop. So, I mean, there's a variation. So I will say that even if you have low GPA, don't be worried, because there are some other skills, for example, research skills or other factors in your application that can compensate for that, especially regards to US applications. In Europe, I have to say that yes, publication matter a little more than US, because the problem, as I said, is in Europe, people can contact directly, right? And it's easy, it's free, nobody cares. I spent zero on applying. So of course, graduate school application in the US has some fees associated with them. For me, it was zero, of course, nil. So you can imagine that when it is nil, everybody is writing an email, right? So then, of course, if 10 emails are coming to a professor's inbox, then your email has to be something which stands out among those 10 pools, right? That's critical, actually. And that's why research experience, publication matters a little more, I have to say, in Europe, if you're applying, as compared to US. But again, as I said, in Europe also, I gave an example in my colleague who didn't have it. So I wouldn't say that it's always the trick. Yeah.
James, how should students approach professors for a good recommendation letter?
To obtain a letter from someone?
A recommendation letter.
I think just picking up on where Harris was taking the conversation, just something a little bit of a sidestep here, which is if you have someone who you're working with and you've been quite successful, with their course, or you've researched with them, it can often be helpful if they write a letter of introduction for you to a professor that you're interested in, because it's more likely, I think, that the professor will read from a letter from another professor. So that's something you might consider, although that's not the only way to do it. A recommendation, I think best recommendations are probably phone calls or Zoom calls. So I'm not sure how much weight I would put in a recommendation, but if someone was applying to my lab, it's really helpful if they include a reference in the application. So I don't have to do any work. I can get in touch with the recommender directly and talk to them. But if they've taken the work out of it of me having to try and get a reference, then I'm obviously going to be very grateful. But I think you're asking about how to choose someone to write a recommendation.
For a recommendation.
I think it's a personal thing. So I think it's someone who you have a personal relationship with, whether it's well, I guess it's a professional relationship, but they know you personally, is what I mean. So someone who's taught you, a mentor that you may have, someone who you've worked in their lab or you've had research experience with them. That's often why people contact me for references, is because someone who interned in my lab was looking for a new position and they wanted to know my thoughts.
During this pandemic era, students couldn't really connect with their professors, and now that they've completed their undergrad, how should they approach to those professors? Because there's no other choice, right? How should we?
Absolutely. I mean, that's a terrible consequence of a terrible couple of years, but I think it's the same principle. You probably have been lectured by a professor and you've engaged with them in some way, shape, or form. You may not have had the opportunity to work in their lab, but it's someone who can speak personally about you, I guess. They can make a personal recommendation about your potential.
Harris, most Asian countries provide a bachelor's degree in science spanning only 3 years, while applying for a master's in Western countries usually requires a 4-year bachelor's degree. What can one do to prevent this from affecting their application?
Yeah, I mean, in India, this is currently a problem, right, with a master's degree. And I think a lot of people have this problem. But I think spending 1 year, as I said, completing a master's before doing PhD, I think is critical. I think in that way, it's more important in India, at least, I'm suggesting, as you asked more specifically about India, to complete your master's and then apply. Because I think the kind of the CV, the kind of research experience that the India environment gives you is little lagging behind what Europe offers you. So I think in the long run, it's important to have a research experience where your CV can stand out. And I think for that, I would recommend, this is my personal recommendation, of course, people can have different opinions on that, and people take different routes according to their choices. But for me, it was important to have a research experience. And that is why I also decided to do master's before entering my PhD, right? Because I mean, ultimately, nobody will care down 10 years from where you did you took 1 year extra, did you took 2 years down, or where was the gap? Because once you have set, you're set. Nobody cares about your CV, and nobody cares about at the back stage of your life. So I have to say that get research experience more, complete your master's, and then go ahead, because then it's a little competitive in your CV, I guess. Yeah.
I'll go around the table with this question. What is the best piece of advice that you have received en route to this moment? James, I'll start with James.
Oh, damn it. I was hoping to have time to think about it. That's a really good question, and one I don't have an answer up my sleeve for, but I think the thing I tell people, the advice I give them, whether it's good or bad, is make sure you choose a position that you're passionate about, because you're the only one who's going to be able to motivate you to finish. So, the other thing about a PhD, it's a marathon, not a sprint. So it's a steady course, and so you have to be, I guess, resilient.
What about you, Yen?
Sorry, I missed the question. Can you say it again?
I was asking, what is the best piece of advice you have received en route to this moment?
I think, the first advice that find a good mentor, because I think good mentor is very important in the scientific career. Find someone that who can inspire you, because doing science is sometimes very tough, very tired. So like if you can have a role model to look up to and inspire you every day, then it like give you more encouragement to pursue science. Yeah, and find the research topic that you like to do, because it will take a lot of time. So you need to find something that you love to do it. Otherwise, it's gonna be miserable. Yeah, I think that's two things I have.
Martha?
Well, I'll have two pieces of advice. One is that came out a lot during my PhD. Do not compare yourself to others. Everyone has their own timeline, their own skills, their own journey. You might have just honors, you might have masters and now PhD, you might have 5 publications, you might have 0. So try not to compare yourself. It's difficult, but try not to. And what was my second piece of advice? It just escaped me. So I'll just finish here.
Robert?
I guess I forget where I heard this from, but it would be, if you don't ask, the answer is always no, which means, if there's an opportunity that you see, right? If you don't apply to that opportunity, you would never be able to get that opportunity. But if you apply, you might not get it, but you could also get it, right? So always apply to everything you're eligible for. That's how I got, my start in science. I just cold emailed professors that I thought would never accept an undergrad with no research experience, right? When I see an opportunity, even though I feel like I wouldn't get in, I still try my best. And that's how I got research experiences, and that's how I built my profile. So always just apply. Don't self-select out of any opportunity.
Paras.
Yeah, I would say for me, I mean, Professor James already said that line actually, and this was said by one of my professors, that it's actually not a sprint, but it's a marathon, right? So I have to say that in PhD, there will be moments when you'll be very down, when your experiments are not working, especially the second year blues, so-called, where you have a lot of imposter syndromes and stuff like that, shuffling on the internet articles. So you'll have some problems in that, I mean, but as he already said, it's more about coming every day with a resilient nature. Thinking and patience is the key, I think, here. Developing and thinking. Give yourself free time. Another thing that I learned over the time. Don't be in so much research that you lose your focus. Sometimes what happens, we think productivity is equal to a lot of work. It's not. Over the time, I've developed this mentality initially, but then I changed it. And now I think it's more about critical thinking and smart doing work rather than juggling in the lab more than 9 to 5 and thinking that I will produce more results. Give your time. Sometimes I have heard from major Nobel laureates of the field, when I was talking to them, that they give themselves time, which means that they take off the leave, go to garden, go to a nice place on Sundays, for example, give yourself time. And then when you go back into the research, I think that helps you more into, thinking into your research content in a very nice view, I would say, in a very refreshed manner, and think in those dimensions in which you don't think initially. So I have to say, take leave. And the third thing that over the time, which I've very important from my friends, which I learned, is selection of the lab. That is very critical. Don't go only for big institutes, go for the people you love. And that is important. PI is always, I say, is important than your research institute or your tag. You may be into Harvard, but your professor is not someone who like to. I've received calls from many of my colleagues who are sitting in US in the big labs, then calling to me that I don't feel like working because professors wants me to work on Sundays and it doesn't give me work-life balance and stuff like that. So he's still not happy despite having a big Ivy League university in his CV. So what matters more to me is that select your PI. This is person, because you have to work there for 4 years, right? 4-5 years, especially. So then I think it's very critical that you select it very clever.
So with this, we come to an end of our roundtable discussion part of the webinar. I will now invite Robert, who has a few things to tell about graduate school application requirements. Robert, the stage is yours.
Can you see my slides?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So hi everyone, I'm Robert. I'm a PhD student at Columbia. I study neuroscience and genetics, but I won't be talking about that today. I'm also the director for events at GradMap Philippines. So GradMap is an organization that helps Filipino students apply to grad school all around the world. So first, I feel like I should discuss a question that not a lot of people ask. Maybe they're shy to ask this, but I feel like it's important to discuss, what is grad school exactly? How is a master's degree or PhD degree different from a bachelor's? And I will try to explain this using a clever illustration that I saw from MathMight. So I just adapted this from someone's work. Imagine or try to think that this circle here and everything inside that represents all of human knowledge, right? When we are in elementary school, we learn a bit about the world, represented by this small dot here. When we go to high school, we learn a bit more. And when we go to college, we learn a bit more, even more, but then we also try to specialize in a certain area, represented by that, a bump in that circle. When we do a master's degree, we even deepen that specialization further, right? But what we know is still within what humanity knows, it's still within the bounds of that circle. And as we read more and more papers, we start reaching the edge of that circle, right? We start to deepen our specialization even further, and then we reach a point where we've learned, I guess, possibly everything else that is to learn within your narrow field of specialization. And so you reach this boundary here. And doing a PhD is basically just trying to push that boundary forward, right? For years and years and years. So you do experiments, you do things that people haven't done before to try to push this boundary forward and answer questions that people don't know the answers to, right? So what people do in a PhD is that they try to uncover things that are not in your textbooks. And once you've made that, you found that new thing or that found that novel thing that you've been asking about, this small dent in our knowledge of the world is what a PhD is, right? So it's a PhD is, just a really, comparatively small contribution to what humanity knows about the world. So how do I apply to grad school? I would say that all grad programs require the following. So number one, at least a bachelor's degree, a statement of purpose. So, like a letter or an essay of some sort, letters of recommendation, your grades or your academic transcripts, and your CV. I know we've talked about this, but research experience is ideal, but it's really not required. So for the next few slides, I will be going through each one of these requirements and try to explain them to you. So first, you need at least a bachelor's degree to go to grad school. You can start applying if you're in your last year of undergrad, right? So you don't have to have graduated from undergrad. You can apply while you're a senior in your program. And when if you want to apply abroad, some regions may require you to prove that your undergrad degree is equivalent to their local undergrad degree. And I know we've touched on this topic during the roundtable discussion, but just to illustrate, so for instance, this is a screenshot of the website of a university in the UK, right? And here, this just shows you what the requirements are in that certain grad school. So for instance, if you're from the Philippines, like I am, I would need to have a master's degree for me to get into that grad school. So that means if I want a master's degree from that grad school, I need to have an existing master's degree in the Philippines, which for me doesn't really make sense, but those are the rules that I think we should be mindful of. And to compare, for instance, if you're from Malaysia and applying to the same grad school, you only need a bachelor's degree from Malaysia. So I think there are these rules that you need to be mindful of. And I've had people, I know people who've had their offers rescinded because they didn't meet this requirement. Although I would say that schools can be sometimes flexible about this requirement, so feel free to just shoot an email to the program that you want to apply to. And in the US, master's degrees are usually not a requirement to do a PhD. I don't have a master's degree myself, and that wasn't a problem for me applying to PhD programs, but I would guess in most of the UK, Europe, and Asia, the norm is to have a master's degree to apply to a PhD program. But again, there are some exceptions. Check the website of the specific programs that you're interested in to see what those specific requirements are. Another thing that you would have to prepare is the statement of purpose, or the SOP. So this is basically just an essay detailing your previous research experiences and your current interests. So for instance, talk about what research question did you try to answer, and how did you try to answer it, and why did you take the approach that you did. Also, you should also talk about, and this is very, very, very important, why are you a good fit for this program? So I know of schools, even schools receive a lot of good applications, right? And I feel like my impression is that schools would turn down good people, or really, if you have like a dozen publications in your name and you apply to a school would turn you down if they feel like you wouldn't be a good fit in their program, right? If your interests don't really match what the department offers, then even if you have like a dozen publications, and if you don't make the case that you would be a good fit in that program, then you're not a good candidate for that program. So I feel like you should talk about, why did you choose to apply in this program over other places? And more importantly, who do you want to work with? So you need to name specific professors and labs whose interests intersect with yours. And my personal rule of thumb is you need to have at least 2 to 3 labs that you're interested in for you to be a good candidate for a department, right? And this is only if you're applying to a program instead of specific labs, which is the case in the US. I should also talk about what are you looking for in the program and what can you contribute to the program. So I don't have time to go through the SOP is an entire talk in itself, but I will give you an excerpt of my own SOP. And I tried to highlight here the things that I felt demonstrated the points that I discussed in the previous slide, right? So here in my SOP, I talked about what I wanted in the department that I wanted to be in, and how these things that I wanted were present in my current department or in the department that I was applying to. Right, so I wanted like a tight-knit and maturing scientific community, a small cohort size, and I also talked about my interest, just gene regulation. And I told them, hey, your department is, a really, really good place to study gene regulation, and I want to do gene regulation, so I would be a good fit in your program. So at GradMap, we have sample materials or sample SOPs and CVs that you could go through and study. So I'll just flash this here for a few seconds. You could scan this QR code and check that website out, and see some sample SOPs that you could study, and just to see what it looks like. Okay. So number 3 would be letters of recommendation, right? So usually programs ask for 2 to 3 letters from people you have done research with, ideally, right? So the most ideal scenario is a letter from a PI or a lab head. But I understand that not all undergrads can have research experience that early. So letters from lecturers or class professors can also work. But again, the most ideal case would be from PIs who will talk about your skills in lab and your potential to be an independent scientist. An important note would be to ask for these letters early, right? So professors are busy, they have a lot of things to do. So you need to ask months in advance for these letters. So, if you're planning to apply to grad school, at least ping your professor or email them, tell them, hey, I might apply for grad school this December. I might need to ask you a letter, just so they know, and they can prepare. Number 4 is at the academic transcript, or basically, your grades. One thing to note is that if you're applying abroad, some schools might ask you for an official conversion into the local grading system. So for instance, I'm from the Philippines. The grading system here is different from in the US. And the programs that I applied to asked me for a conversion from the Philippine grading scale to the US grading scale. During the application process, you can do it, with unofficial conversion tools, which is what I did. But eventually, when I got in the program, they asked me for like an official conversion, which cost $200. Just something to take note. But again, check the program website for exact requirements. Some programs might ask you to send the transcript from the university. So basically, what could happen is your university would send the transcript via mail to the university that you want to apply to, instead of it going through your hands. In some cases, the universities that you're applying to might want to have like a direct mail from your current university. So just take note. And good grades can help you, but you can make up for bad grades with research experience. So I had a failing grade in a physics class because that class was so boring. I didn't want to go into that class, and I was always late. But that didn't affect my application that much because I had good research experience. And a lot of, studies, there are studies that show that the better predictor of success in grad school is actually not college grades, but previous research experience. And universities know this. You would also need to have your CV, which is basically an exhaustive list of your credentials, publications, presentations, awards, and research experiences. Again, the CV could be another talk in itself, but in the previous QR code that I showed you, there should also be, a list of sample CVs there that you could pattern yours after. But what's important to note is for undergrads, especially who don't have a lot of research experience, you should highlight specific contributions to research projects. And I will show an example in the next slide. And one thing to note is that publications are good, but they are not at all required to get to grad school. And we've talked about this during the roundtable discussion. So for instance, here in a line of my CV, I discussed, what I did during that research experience, what I discovered, and what lab techniques I did, which is, important. So basically, you just need to discuss in detail, right? What is the research question, and very briefly what you did to answer that question. But again, there are like different formats of CVs, and some programs might have specific formats. So in Europe, for example, some places have like a format which you just like fill in and digitally. So you don't need to like write it in this way. And it might vary depending on the institution that you're applying to. So the requirements that I discussed, up to this point are usually the core requirements, I would say. But there are some grad programs which may require the following in addition. So some programs might require other statements. So these days, schools might ask for a diversity statement, which is just, for you to talk about how you can contribute to diversity in the institution that you want to go to. There are also personal statements, which are more personal than an SOP, right? So you talk about your personal challenges and how you overcame them and so on and so forth. Some schools may also require test scores like GRE and language exams, and I will be talking about that in a while. And some grad programs, or actually most, at least in the US, require an application fee. So if you have to pay a fee, it would usually be around like $100, which is prohibitively expensive, and which is the reason why I didn't apply to a lot of grad schools when I was applying. So pro tip is to look for programs with no application fee. So programs that I know that don't have application fees would be the program at Cold Spring Harbor Laboratory. They don't have an application fee. The program at the Francis Crick Institute also doesn't have an application fee, I believe. And the program at the Okinawa Institute of Science and Technology doesn't have an application fee. And I feel like there are more that, I just don't remember. But yeah, it's always good to apply to a program with no application fee because it's free, right? And when you apply to grad schools, you have this collection of letters. And when you apply to different universities, you just change, some things about the letter, and then you can like customize it a little for the universities that you're applying to. So regarding test scores, schools these days might not require the GRE, but some schools still require it. So the GRE is basically the graduate record exam, which consists of 3 sections: math, reading, and writing. It costs money. It costs $205 the last time I checked, but I think it's more expensive for students in India and China for some reason. And I would advise you, if you want to take this test, to register online and do it early. I mean, you have to register online, but do it early because the slots run out as you go closer to December, which is the deadline for most US schools. However, do note that schools are starting to make the GRE optional. So, if you can't afford it, it's fine. And schools would understand. I hope they understand because the GRE is expensive. You might also be required to take the Toefl or the Ielts. So the difference between the two is that the Toefl is preferred by US schools, and the Ielts, I believe, is preferred in other countries, and it also costs around $200. And again, register online and do it early. In GradMap, we have more detailed guides of the specifics of applying to grad school. And if you scan this QR code, this will lead you to the section on our website where we have like videos on how to write an SOP or how to write a CV. So, I'll just flash this for a moment for you to try to go to that website and explore what's there. And so if you submit this, And if they like you, they will invite you for an interview. And the interview again is another talk in itself. And I'll leave this here. But if they like you after the interview, then they will accept you. And so you got accepted, yay. How do you fund your grad studies? So 2 possible scenarios. Number 1 is that admission comes with full funding from the school. Yay, that's the ideal case. And in the US, in most cases, if you get an admission from a school, you don't need to apply to a scholarship. So I don't have a scholarship myself. I only applied to my university, and the offer came with funding. It came with free tuition, it came with funding and everything. But I feel like in most other places, you might need an external scholarship to cover part or all of your tuition and living expenses. This is just my personal opinion, and people might have different opinions about this, but I think no one should ever pay for grad school out of their own pocket, like ever, because there are lots of opportunities for you to go to grad school for free. And I've heard of people paying grad school out of their own pocket. And maybe it's because they really like working in a specific lab and that lab doesn't have money. But I feel like, it's not worth going into debt for something that you can get for free through other means. But that's just me. So how to look for scholarships? I would advise you to start looking from a government agency, for example, or a foundation in your home country. So you can go to the, say, Ministry of Education's website and then look for possible opportunities there. You could also go to the government agency or foundation in the country of your chosen university if you want to do it abroad. And you could also look for some opportunities from the university itself, right? So there are some universities where you apply to a program, and then when you get in the program, then you apply to a scholarship at the university. So in some universities, the application for the program and the scholarships are different, or they're done in parallel. And in some universities, when you get accepted to a program, you automatically get considered for a scholarship, but that scholarship is not guaranteed. So there are different situations. But just to give you some idea of the scholarships that you can try to look for. So for example, in Germany, there's the DAAD. If you want to study in Germany, they have opportunities for, I guess, like students from abroad. Or if you're in Germany and you want to try to have an exchange abroad, they also have opportunities for that. In the UK, there's the Schevening scholarships. In Australia, there's the Australia Awards. Japan has the MEX scholarships. The US has Fulbright scholarships. So I would suggest you to check the embassy or government website of the country where you'd like to do your grad school. That would be a good place to start. Although I would say that some of these scholarships might require you to return to your home country after grad school. So for me, I did not want to have that, that obligation. So I didn't apply to any of these scholarships because I feel like, being obligated to return to my home country after grad school would narrow down the opportunities available for me, right? So, but to each their own. If really there's, if it's really hard for you to get funding, then you might want to consider these scholarships. And again, at GradMap, we have a resource for, a list of scholarships. I'll flash this QR code for a moment so you could scan it and then explore a bit, explore our website a bit to see what scholarships are posted there. So if you want to learn more about applying to grad school, please do watch out for our events. We actually have an event coming up this August 6th, right? August 6th, 10 a.m. Philippine time, which is GMT +8. This event will be about why you should go to grad school. So basically, we won't be talking about the application process itself, but we will be talking about what it's like, the day in the life of a grad student, what are the opportunities after grad school, and so on and so forth. Just scan this QR code to register for the event. And you could also go to gradmap.ph/events for a list of our events. So, not the forthcoming events aren't posted there yet, but then you could see some of our previous events and our future events will be posted there. And if you want to register for those, you would find it in this website. So a list of upcoming events, which we haven't publicized yet, but just so you know, In September, we will have a deep dive into the grad school application process for these different countries. So these are going to be on September 10, 17, and 24. We will be inviting grad students from these countries to talk about what it takes to make a good application for the grad schools in these countries. And in October 15, we have office hours. So basically there will be like speakers or people in the Zoom room, and then people could just come in and come out and talk about, their issues with the grad school application process, or if they need help with specific things, and so on and so forth. And in November 12th, we have a writing workshop where professors will be critiquing an SOP, and so what professors are looking for in an SOP. Yeah, so you can visit our website, gradmap.ph, if you're curious about our organization. Also visit our socials, facebook.com/gradmapph and @gradmap_ph on Twitter. So in GradMap, we have like a mentorship program where grad school applicants are paired with current grad students or postdocs or professors. And this mentorship, kind of guides the mentees on how to craft a CV or how to apply to specific schools or how to choose schools. But then the pairing has just closed, and we are trying to focus on Filipino students because we don't have a lot of opportunities in the Philippines. But yeah, do follow our socials just for you to keep posted on our events. And that's it. Thank you for listening. And if you have questions that we won't be discussing here, you could feel free to shoot me a message on my Twitter, Robert Aguilar PH. That's it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Robert. That was an amazing presentation. Before we end the webinar, before we finish it off, I wanted to ask everyone, even after preparing so much for the grad school application and things like those, there are still times when students may not get accepted into their dream university. How would you advise them to cope from this and kind of not take it personally? I'll start with James.
Yeah, it's always going to be tough. I mean, for us, it's the same thing. I mean, we've only got so many spots in the lab that we can offer positions to students for. So it's the same with everyone. There's only limited space. But I think it's, as we've kind of discussed today, it's about having backups. And I remember Yen saying when she was deciding, she came up with a list and started at the top and worked her way through, but was lucky enough, I think, to get one of her preferred choices. But I think that's what you need to do. You need to figure out what you want to do and who can help you to, to realize that dream. And it may end up being a silver lining. You might end up in an even better environment, and you may have even better luck with the project and end up with an even better paper than you could have imagined. So I wouldn't be discouraged. I just keep trying.
Martha.
I would have the same response as James. There might be a dream position that you really, really want to do, but there's just so many people in the world that you are competing against that it's quite difficult to be the chosen one. But yeah, don't get discouraged. Like there will be opportunities coming your way if you ask for them. And as James mentioned, like you don't know, you may end up in a better lab. The supervisor may open you better possibilities than in your dream lab. Maybe the dream lab was very big and you wouldn't have as much possibilities or attention from your supervisor. So don't think that the PhD you are getting, the option B or option C, is worse than your option A, because you just do not know. So just keep trying.
Harris?
Yeah, I would say that it's important, as Professor James highlighted, not to get discouraged in this competitive world. And I would say always that your research will be recognized. That is more important, I think, than the place. I always say to people, because I mean, in the glamour world of research, sometimes people look into, for example, I'm going to give little off path to kind of explain this topic better. For example, if you know this Lorry method, right, this for protein estimation, it came back in 1951. And I was just looking, because when Zainab asked this question, I was just looking in the Google. So it has, I don't know, some millions, 2.2 million or something citation. I don't know how many. It's in JBC. It's not in Nature. It's not in Cell. It's not in Science. People are on to this, right? But still, it got recognized into the field that it has so many citations that you would never imagine. I guess it must be one of the highest cited papers in my I've seen, right? So still got into a very small impact factor paper, which people can't like visibly see, JBC, but you see the impact that it has, right? So don't be discouraged by not getting into a big Ivy League university that you apply to. It's always good because you get more research experience. You have a lot of people to talk about research and a lot of collaborative environment where you can do research. But sometimes I've seen professors, for example, my previous supervisor in India, I mean, he did his PhD from some IITs and IICs and even not abroad, some top tier US universities. He did it from small institute in India, in Kolkata, but then he moved on to US for his postdoc in a very luckily good lab where he published 2 Nature paper back to back, and then he got faculty position back in India in Indian Institute of Science. So my point is, his PhD was not, of course, the dreamland where he thought, but now he's in a very good place. So it takes time, as I said. Sometimes, your research comes later. So give priority, think whatever you have, best utilize your opportunities that you have been offered, and then try to turn into a next opportunity. That's more important. Sometimes you'll not do good in PhD, but do good, maybe you perform very well, outstandingly well in postdoc. And I read one of the, I think in the chat, Professor James highlighted some of the couple examples where he saw some PhD students without any paper and then publishing quite well in fantastic in postdoc. So I think that's the key. Don't think that you lost something. Be calm and then try to turn those opportunities that you have into your next opportunity.
Yen, what do you have to advise?
Yeah, I think everyone already covered. So there's a saying that one door closed, the other doors will open. So yeah, again, don't be upset if you don't get the school you want. Always prepare the backup plan. Yeah.
Robert, anything to add?
I feel like people have said it beautifully, but I would just say that prestige is overrated. Like if you're, in science, you realize that a lot of this prestige is like manufactured. I mean, it's like a lot of it is just marketing, and I feel like a lot of people get really gung-ho about, oh, I really want to get into this school or in this lab. But then, as you go into science, you realize that it's really not, like, for example, you see a paper that's in a big journal, and then you realize, oh, that story is like overrated. It's really not, the data isn't really good. It's just that how they made up the story. So there are these things in science that I feel like undergrads don't really get a sense of. And so I would say, don't be disheartened if you didn't get into your dream grad school. There's always opportunities down the road. And there are really, really great scientists that don't come from these prestige institutions, right? And if you're passionate about science and you work, you'll eventually get to a point where people will recognize you and know your name just because even if you were quietly in a small corner of the lab and you're producing papers, then it'll get you somewhere. So in the end, I feel like the where you did your grad school from doesn't really matter in the in the long term, right? So yeah.
Well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. Thank you, James, Haris, Yen, Robert, Martha, and all the attendees for taking part in this conversation with the IUBMB Trainee Initiative. Our next event will be held by our group of representatives from America. So stay connected with us by visiting our website, https://iubmb.org/about/committees/IUBMB Trainee Initiative. You can also follow us on Instagram and Twitter at IUBMB_trainee. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I second you, Sainas. Thank you, everyone. And see you soon. And keep connected to us, because I'm sure we can help you anyhow and in many different forms. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, I think we can end the webinar now.